My boyfriend Philip fell in love with a thief. Not only did he refuse to press charges, but he also wanted to offer her a job in his company. I tried to convince him to reconsider and avoid inviting disaster by involving her. But when she heard my words, the thief started crying and ran into the middle of the street, where she was hit by a car and died. Philip stopped talking about her and went ahead with our wedding as planned. We remained affectionate with each other just as before. However, when I was about to give birth after 10 months of pregnancy, he refused to take me to the hospital and delayed everything until both I and the baby died. Do you understand now Ayla's pain? When I opened my eyes again, I was reborn at the aisle, having come to steal from her house. Before Philip could speak, I smiled and said, "This girl is so unfortunate. Why don't I move out and let her live here instead?" I was lying in a pool of blood, weakly reaching my hand out to Philip, but he stood far away, watching coldly as I struggled to survive alone. I had never seen such a strange Philip before. When labour pains started, I immediately called him. He said he would return quickly to take me to the hospital and asked me to wait for him at home. So I didn't call an ambulance despite being drenched in cold sweat from the pain, with my teeth chattering. As soon as I felt that Philip would be back soon, I thought he was just waiting. However, when he came back, he showed no intention of taking me to the hospital. My amniotic fluid had already broken, and I urgently needed to go to the hospital to deliver, or the baby could suffocate. "Honey, what's wrong with you?" I asked weakly, exhausted from the pain, but Philip remained calm, as though he was enjoying my suffering. After a while, he slowly spoke, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What's the rush? You haven't bled as much as Delilah did back then." Only then did I remember the long-forgotten name. It filled me with a chilling realization. I thought back to how I had believed he was simply soft-hearted, wanting to help a thief. I never imagined how deeply in love he was. We had known each other since we were teenagers, and I had been there for him from the very beginning. Yet, our over 10-year relationship couldn't compare to the thief's hold on him. Even the marriage I thought was happy and complete had been a trap set by him to get revenge on me. "Philip, the baby in my belly is yours," I said. He grabbed my chin and retorted, "Aren't you looking down on Ayla Bethel?" I could only reply, "It's you who doesn't deserve it. A wicked woman like you doesn't deserve to bear my child." At that moment, I had no hope left in him. I just wanted to save myself. I struggled to crawl towards the door, but he stepped on me. "Now do you understand Delilah's pain?" I died in overwhelming hatred, hoping I could start over and stay away from these two scumbags. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself standing at the door of my house. Philip was opening the door beside me. As soon as it swung open, we both saw Delilah inside, looking around in panic, searching for a place to hide. I was reborn exactly as I had been in my past life. Philip charged forward in a few steps and grabbed Delilah's wrist. "Who are you?" he demanded. Delilah trembled with fear and with tears in her eyes said, My name is Delilah." Philip froze immediately. Yeah, how could a thief tell her real name, he thought. She was truly naive and innocent. "What are you doing in my house?" he asked. "I was so hungry, I just wanted to find something to eat," Delilah explained, her tears falling. Philip's heart softened once again. "This is the 3rd floor, how did you get in?" he asked. "I climbed in from the balcony," Delilah confessed, bursting into tears. "I'm sorry, I was wrong, I'll never do it again." Philip said sternly, "Are you crazy?" With just those 3 sentences, he was already smitten. I regretted being so blind in my past life. I had focused only on checking if anything was missing at home, and I wanted to call the police. But at that time, Philip had stopped me, saying she was just hungry and hadn't taken anything, so there was no need to call the police. Later, I noticed that a set of jewellery my mother had given me, which was placed at the back of the cabinet, was missing. It wasn't particularly valuable, but it was unique, handed down by my grandmother. I told Philip about it, but he claimed I must have forgotten where I had placed it. Later, I saw the jewellery being sold on a second-hand website. I bought it back, and it was definitely mine. I immediately wanted to call the police, but Philip scolded me for overreacting and transferred some money to me, asking me to be lenient. Thinking back, it was clear he was already hopelessly in love with her. To him, everything Delilah did was justifiable. He also told me that not everyone understood the hardships of life like I did. I hadn't been ignorant of hardship. I had been there with Philip from the start, living in a basement and drinking with clients until I developed a stomach hemorrhage. I had just been spoiled by my parents, whereas Delilah had grown up in an orphanage. This difference became a thorn in Philip's side and ultimately led him to murder me out of spite. Pulling myself out of those memories, I watched as the two of them gazed at each other affectionately. I quietly approached, reached into Delilah's bulging pocket and took my jewelry. I moved quickly, and Delilah didn't have time to stop me. When Philip saw what was happening, he looked from the jewelry in my hand to Delilah, his face darkening with anger. As he fell out of love with her, the truth of her actions became clear. However, before I could say anything, Delilah suddenly dropped to her knees in front of me, crying uncontrollably. "Sister, I'm sorry. I was just so hungry that I lost my mind and made a mistake. Please don't call the police. I swear I won't do it again." She knocked her head on the ground with loud thudding sounds just like in my past life. Philip looked at her with pity but frowned unhappily as he turned to me. "You didn't lose anything. Don't be so fussy," I sneered. In my previous life, when I couldn't find the stolen goods, I had insisted on calling the police. The two of them were always playing the pity card, with him blaming me. But this time, I took the stolen goods from Delilah myself, and before I even said a word, he was already blaming me. I scoffed in disdain. "Are you blind or deaf?" Philip's expression stiffened, clearly shocked, unable to comprehend when I had ever spoken to him so rudely. I glanced at Delilah, whose forehead was swollen from the impact. "What am I being so fussy about? I didn't say I would call the police." Seeing the confused looks from both of them, I continued. "How pitiful this girl is. I think we should let her stay here." Despite Philip's usual absurdity, he clearly had not anticipated that I was serious, and his face darkened, his mood shifting. "Bethel, are you using other people's misfortunes as jokes? I never knew you could be so cold and selfish." I didn't want to argue further, so I went straight into the room, grabbed a suitcase, and began packing. Philip followed me, seized my arm, and yanked it so forcefully that I almost lost my balance. "What on earth are you making a fuss about?" he growled, trying to suppress his fury. "Let go," I said icily. "Enough, Philip. Know your limits." During our argument, there was a loud thud from the living room. Philip immediately released me and rushed out, panicked. I stood at the bedroom door, watching as Delilah lay on the floor, clutching her stomach and groaning in pain. It seemed she had a stomachache, just like in my past life. Without hesitation, Philip scooped her up into his arms. When he turned and saw me, his face grew awkward, but he simply said, "I'll take her to the hospital," and rushed out without sparing a glance. In my previous life, seeing this scene had left me stunned. As a person with normal values, I could never have imagined that someone could fall in love at first sight with a thief who had broken into their home. When Philip later explained, he told me that seeing Delilah reminded him of his own painful past. He had been an orphan and, as a child, had been so hungry that he resorted to stealing corn, only to be chased by dogs. He was my first love, and we had been together for so long. Trusting him in my previous life, I believed him. Now, however, as they were at the hospital, I hurriedly finished packing my things, grabbed the suitcase, and checked into a hotel. It all happened so suddenly that I feared returning home would worry my parents. I had planned to tell them about the breakup in due time. Coincidentally, several housing agencies were located near the hotel. After settling in, I intended to visit them and look at some properties. But as soon as I stepped out of the elevator, I ran into someone unexpected in the hotel lobby. We both froze in place, staring at each other in surprise, speaking at the same time. "Bethlehem Galahad, what are you doing here?" Galahad, a classmate from high school and also Philip's rival, was clearly taken aback. "Where's Philip?" Galahad was always at the top of the class rankings, and while Philip was excellent, Galahad consistently outranked him. Every time Philip played basketball, a crowd of girls would gather to watch him, but as soon as someone shouted that Galahad was coming, everyone would rush to see him instead. Philip harboured resentment for Galahad, believing he could never surpass him, attributing it to Galahad's wealth, while Philip had been an orphan. I had been closer to Philip back then, as we were in the same class. I knew the effort he put into everything, and at times I even felt that life had been unfair to him. Galahad was in the class next door, so we didn't interact much. However, to my surprise, when Philip and I got married, Galahad had sent a red envelope with 3 words written on the back: "Wish you happiness." I had wanted to contact him and thank him, but Philip angrily stopped me, claiming that Galahad was only showing off and that we shouldn't pay any attention to him. As I kept my head down and didn't respond, Galahad asked softly, "What's wrong?" I was about to speak when I heard Philip's angry shout. "Bethel, what are you doing?" I turned around, and Philip had already stormed over, grabbing my shoulders in fury. He pulled me so hard that I staggered. Galahad quickly reacted, supporting me with one hand and grabbing Philip's wrist with the other. Philip, feeling the pain, released me and glared at us with bloodshot eyes. "What are you doing here at the hotel?" "Bethel, no wonder you wanted to move out." "You did it for him, didn't you?" I raised my hand and slapped him across the face. "Watch your mouth," I snapped. Philip's expression twisted into one of fury, and he seemed to despise me. Galahad's voice was cold as he replied, "This hotel is owned by my family." Philip was left speechless. He hadn't kept in touch with his former classmates, and he hadn't known what Galahad was up to. While Philip could afford to stay in a regular hotel, Galahad had no need to flaunt his wealth. To avoid causing trouble for Galahad, I lied to Philip. "I just checked in and ran into him less than 5 minutes ago when I came downstairs." I glanced at Delilah standing next to Philip and retorted, "What are you doing here at the hotel?" Philip's face darkened, his patience wearing thin. "She has nowhere to stay, so I'm letting her stay here for a few days. Come back with me. Stop causing a scene." I sneered. "What are you? A sacred relic? When a thief came into your house to steal things, instead of calling the police, you took her to the hospital, then brought her to stay at a 5-star hotel. Why don't you sit in the place of the giant Buddha and meditate there?" Philip's face changed several times, clearly struggling with his emotions. Yet, he didn't want to give in. "Is it necessary to be so cruel? People like you who don't understand the hardships of life have no empathy at all." Delilah's eyes welled up with tears as she clung to his arm, trying to soothe him. "Brother Philip, don't argue with sister because of me. I don't want to affect your relationship." After saying this, she bit her lip and shyly looked at Galahad. Suddenly, Galahad seemed to remember something. "Your name is Delilah?" Delilah's eyes brightened and she replied eagerly, "Yes, my name is Delilah. Do you know me?" Galahad's expression hardened. "Yes, Delilah. You stole a set of silver handicrafts from us at the reception in the KU Jiang store last month." Delilah's face turned pale as she glanced at Philip, silently pleading for help. Philip too looked like he had been struck hard, his face growing darker. "Galahad, are you trying to make trouble?" Philip demanded. Several security guards had already surrounded them. Galahad calmly said, "Just ask her, and you'll know." Philip looked at Delilah for confirmation. Her lips trembled and tears began to fall. I stood there for a long time, struggling to continue speaking, but couldn't get the words out. Philip's expression grew darker and darker, a mix of embarrassment and discomfort. Galahad explained calmly, "At that time, we learned that she was a part-time worker and quite young, so we decided not to take it further. Since it's such a coincidence that we've met again today, we might as well resolve it now." His words felt like a slap to Philip's face, especially after Philip had just said that people like me, who don't understand life's struggles, lack empathy. Galahad had become like my advocate, and I couldn't help but feel thrilled. Philip was left speechless, almost as if he were choked up. Delilah moved forward to grab Galahad's arm, but he skillfully avoided her. She missed and then turned back to plead with Philip. "Brother Philip, please help me. I only did wrong because life has been hard. I promise I'll listen to you from now on and I'll never mess up again. Philip hesitated, but after a moment he asked, "How much is that item worth?" Galahad pulled out his phone, opened the product page, and showed him. It's a set of handmade tea pieces crafted by a master silversmith, worth 100 ziren. Philip's face froze immediately. He could afford 100 ziren, but he had worked hard for his money. Ironically, when Delilah heard the price, the corner of her mouth twitched. My jewellery set was also valued at about 100 ziren, but I had bought it for only 20 ziren from a second-hand website. I guessed that Delilah hadn't known the true value of the items when she stole them, selling them at a much lower price. Now Philip was forced to reimburse her at the original price, and just thinking about it made me feel satisfied. Philip, caught in a difficult spot, shifted his anger toward me. "Bethel, why are you enjoying this?" he said. "I suggested this seriously. If you don't like it, call the police." His face flushed red as he turned his fury on Galahad again. "Can't you see he's just a petty villain?" I almost laughed at his ridiculousness. Philip stared at me with disappointment, as if in disbelief. "You really want to be with someone like him? We're all just people who don't understand the struggles of life. Didn't you say that yourself?" Philip was so angry that his eyes were practically popping out of his head and his fists clenched. But Delilah, still gazing at him expectantly, caused Philip to relent. He finally took out his card and paid 100 ziren for the stolen items. After the payment, he glared at me, and as if to deliberately provoke me, he took Delilah's hand and stormed off. "Let's go home." I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Just then, I met Galahad's gaze, and I quickly masked my expression, though he seemed amused by me. "Thank you, Galahad," I said earnestly. He smiled and shook his head, looking more charming than Philip ever did. At that moment, I remembered something from my previous life. Someone had sent me a portable hard drive with photos and videos showing Delilah secretly following Philip at a reception. The timestamp was from before she stole anything from his house, meaning she hadn't randomly entered. She had been after Philip all along. I had been eager to tell Philip about it back then, but when I saw him at the company, he told me that Delilah would be officially working there and asked me to take her with me. I blurted out, "Don't invite a wolf into your home." After hearing that, Delilah had run off straight into traffic and I couldn't stop her. She was hit and died, and Philip was deeply affected, reluctant to speak her name again. I too didn't bring it up out of respect for the dead. Over time I had forgotten about it, but now, as I thought about it, I wondered, could Galahad have been the one who sent me that hard drive? Tentatively I asked him, was Philip at the reception where Delilah was? He nodded. When we reviewed the surveillance, I happened to be nearby and saw them both. So he knew Delilah had been following Philip at that time. After a brief pause, Galahad asked, "Should I have someone copy the files for you?" I quickly waved my hand. "No, it's fine. They don't have sympathy for each other, so we don't need to get involved." He smiled at me again, amused, and I couldn't help but notice how dazzling his smile was. Besides him, I couldn't think of anyone who would have sent me that hard drive, but since we weren't that close, it didn't make much sense. However, I knew I'd find out eventually. After Galahad went to a meeting, I didn't want to delay him further. We said goodbye, added each other on WeChat, and he told me to contact him if I needed anything, but I doubted I'd ever trouble him again. I went to a housing agency to look for a place. Agent Shah took me to see a few homes, and I was satisfied with one of them. I was ready to sign the contract quickly. Shah said, "Theo lives next door. Let's check if he's back." As soon as we walked outside, we saw Galahad opening the door to his place. He looked up, and we both stopped, staring at each other in surprise. Shah didn't seem to notice anything unusual and cheerfully greeted him. "Mr. Galahad, you just got back? How coincidental. This lady wants to rent your house." I couldn't believe it. Now I was Galahad's neighbour living next door. He helped me bring my luggage back to the hotel, and after settling it, brought over some vegetables, saying that no one had lived in the house before. On the first day, we should cook and share a meal, as this would prosper the house and bring better fortune. As I watched him wash vegetables in the kitchen, everything felt surreal. We had only just met today, yet he was calling us friends. He noticed my gaze and paused, looking at me with a light smile. "Did I disturb you?" "No," I replied. I just think it's amazing. I never imagined we'd meet like this. Me too, he said with a bright smile. Nice to meet you, Bethel. I didn't know why, but my cheeks felt warm. Just then, the sound of a text message interrupted the moment. I looked at my phone and saw several photos sent by an unknown number. In the photos, Delilah was wearing a pajama I had left behind, posing in front of a mirror. She also asked, "Sister, won't you be mad if I wear your pajama?" I replied. I used that to clean the toilet, so I didn't take it with me. She didn't respond further. When I was packing my things, I had felt disgusted seeing that piece of clothing, and I didn't want to keep it. In my previous life, after Philip took Delilah to the hospital, I thought she'd be out of our lives. But a few days later, I came home to find her in my house wearing my pajama. I slapped her in anger, and Philip, seeing this, immediately protected Delilah. He claimed it was his idea to let her bathe at the house and told me to take out my frustrations on him. I slapped him twice and asked him what he was trying to do. If he had fallen for this thief, I would have left him right away, but he denied it and told me not to say such things. He insisted that he felt sorry for Delilah, and after she left, he apologized to me and pretended to still love me. I had believed him because I thought an arrogant person like him wouldn't fall for someone like her. Eventually, I realized I had overestimated him. "Are you okay?" Galahad asked, noticing my mood. Hearing his voice, I relaxed and shook my head. "If you ever need anything, just let me know," he said. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, genuinely curious. He lowered his eyes and thought for a moment before answering. "Because you're a good person." Such a childish answer. Why was he so gentle? I was just charmed by his kindness when my phone rang again. It was Philip. As soon as I picked up, he angrily asked, "When are you coming back?" "Haven't you caused enough trouble?" I replied. "I forgot to officially tell you, but we're breaking up. Don't contact me again." I then blocked his number. Finally, Galahad and I had a peaceful dinner together. The next day, I went to the office to complete the resignation process, and surprisingly, Isla was there as well. Felipe sneered upon seeing me. "Didn't you say you were ending things? Didn't you say you wouldn't contact me again? Why are you back? Did you regret it already? Since Delilah is here, apologize to her and admit your mistake to me, and I'll pretend like nothing happened." Delilah also joined in, trying to stir things up. "Sister, I know you don't like me, but I don't hold a grudge. However, you were very disrespectful to Brother Felipe yesterday. If you want him to forgive you, you should apologize." I ignored them and walked past, heading to the HR department. Philippe continued to nag behind me. "What's with your attitude? Where do you think you're going? What are you doing?" I addressed the HR manager calmly. "Please help me with my resignation paperwork." The room fell completely silent. After processing what was happening, Philippe grabbed my wrist tightly. "What did you say?" "Say it again." I repeated to the HR manager. "Please process my resignation as soon as possible." Philippe, now furious, shouted at the HR manager like a madman. "Don't help her!" I leaned closer to the HR manager and whispered, "Are you really that reluctant to let go of my father's resources?" In my past life, Philippe never loved me, but still insisted on staying with me. I could only think of that reason now. My whole family worked in foreign trade, with many long-term clients brought in through my father's connections. Philippe looked deeply insulted and gritted his teeth. "Do you think so little of me?" I shook my head in disbelief. "I just don't want to see you anymore." His chest rose and fell as he got angry before throwing out, "You'll regret this," and storming out. I successfully completed my resignation process, and from that moment, I had no connection to Philippe. I had no desire for revenge, nor did I want to waste any more time on such a scumbag. I just wanted to live my life well. But, as fate would have it, enemies sometimes meet on narrow roads. One day, after purchasing something from the convenience store near my neighborhood, my heel broke, causing me to sprain my ankle. The bags I was holding fell to the ground, scattering their contents everywhere. As I bent down to gather the items, I heard Delilah's voice. "Sister, what are you doing here? Are you working at the convenience store now?" I looked up and saw Philip and Delilah walking toward me. Delilah had changed into a business suit, and they looked like quite the pair. It seemed that Philippe had already allowed her to work at the company. Her eyes shifted to my feet, and she dramatically exclaimed, "Oh, sister, your shoes are so worn out. Brother Philippe just bought me new ones. You can wear my old ones." She handed me the bag she was carrying, smiling proudly. I looked at Philippe, and he seemed uncomfortable for a moment, but he went along with her. "She's kind-hearted and is offering them to you. Just wear them." I scoffed and pointed to the bag. "Take them out and let me see them." Delilah happily pulled out the old shoes and showed them to me. "These are perfect for young people, though they might not match your age. But you can still wear them." I glanced at them and turned to Philippe. "They're a bit dirty. If you clean them, I'll wear them." Philip's eyes widened with fury. I turned to Delilah in surprise. "He's unwilling to clean them. He thinks you're dirty." Delilah was stunned, not knowing how to react. Just then, Galahad appeared. He quietly collected the scattered items and squatted down in front of me, turning to smile. "I'll carry you on my back." Philippa finally reacted, angrily pointing at him. "What are you doing here? Why are you two together again?" I noticed the cleaning lady not far away and kicked off my shoes. "Auntie, please help me throw these shoes away." The aunt nodded, and I sighed, feeling relieved. Who would keep old shoes? I climbed onto Galahad's strong back, and he effortlessly carried me home with large strides. Philippe followed behind, fuming. "Get down! Are you out of your mind? Where are you going with him?" Galahad carried me into the community, and I heard the guard stop Philippe and Delilah behind us. Philippe shouted, "Why can they go in?" The guard replied, "They're the owners." Philippe immediately fell silent. "We're going in to meet clients," he said, but the guard firmly refused them entry, stating that outsiders couldn't come in. I smiled quietly. Philippe's voice faded away as we continued. In my world, only Galahad's presence and his clean, fresh scent filled the space. I told my parents that I had broken up with Philippe, and they were very supportive. After Philippe found out I was living with Galahad, he started calling me frantically from different numbers. That was when I realized that Philippe seemed to have an extreme side to his character. Galahad, on the other hand, was always calm, reserved, and measured. For instance, I found an unopened projector in the TV cabinet, so I went next door to ask Galahad if I could use it to watch movies. He agreed without hesitation and then asked if he could watch with me. I said of course, and we settled in to watch. The movie we watched was Coco, about dead souls who can still do the things they love as long as they are remembered by the living. There was a line in the movie that caught my attention. "Best wishes, with no strings attached." Suddenly, I remembered a red envelope that Galahad had sent someone to give me in my past life. I turned to him and asked, "If I were to marry, what would you say to me?" He appeared lost in the movie for a moment, but when he looked at me, his eyes seemed a little moist, deep and thoughtful. I would say, "I wish you happiness." A bold question almost slipped out of my mouth, but I didn't dare ask it. A few days later, Delilah blocked me at the entrance of the community. As soon as she saw me, she angrily confronted me. "Bethel, something happened at the company. Are you just hiding here, not caring about it?" I was confused. "What happened?" She ranted about how many people had complained that the company plagiarized manuscripts and how Philippe was swamped trying to deal with the fallout. "You don't even know about it," she accused. I sneered. "Why should I, an ex-employee, care about the company's problems?" She glared at me. "I know you're jealous because Brother Philippe is so good to me and you hate him because of that, but it won't do you any good. It'll only make him dislike you more. If you want him back, you should do it the right way." I raised an eyebrow. "What's the right way?" "Of course, get your father to solve his current troubles and also apologize publicly to us," she said confidently. I had enough and walked past her. She rushed to stop me, pulling on my arm. I immediately slapped her. "These clothes are expensive." "You can't afford to pay for them if you dirty them." Delilah covered her face in shock and started crying. "Brother Philippe!" At that moment, Philippe swung his arm to slap me, but I instinctively dodged. Just then, another person appeared in front of me. It was Galahad, who firmly grabbed Philippe's arm. He turned to me asking, "Are you okay?" My eyes welled up, and I couldn't help but wonder, "Why did you come back so soon?" He looked a bit embarrassed, then softly replied, "Today's my birthday." With those simple words, my heart swelled. I noticed Philippe was about to use his other hand on Galahad, so I quickly kicked him between his legs. He stumbled and bent down, covering himself. Delilah shrieked like a chicken, and Philippe took that moment to hurl Philip toward her. "Get lost!" he yelled, and it was the first time I heard him curse. So sexy. Philippe was held up by Delilah and glared at me with malice. I walked over and slapped him hard twice. "I've told you, I don't want to see you again. Don't come bringing bad luck," I said. As I said that, I remembered how every time I was with Galahad, our good moments were always spoiled by them. I slapped them both again. After 3 slaps, the anger and cruelty left Philippe's face, and he looked at me blankly, asking, "Do you hate me that much?" I turned around, took Galahad's arm, and walked away. I had thought Galahad came back early to take me to dinner, but unexpectedly, he brought me to our high school. The guard recognized him and led us inside. I followed him across the playground to a big tree behind the library. He sighed, opened his palm, and handed me something. A glass bunny. My mind was instantly taken back to many years ago when I saw a glass bunny displayed beside the cashier at the stationery store by the school entrance. It was exquisitely carved and beautiful. I pointed at it and asked the shopkeeper, but he rudely interrupted, saying it wasn't for sale, and told me not to touch it. I was disappointed, but each time I visited, I stood by it and looked at it for a while. It eventually disappeared. I asked my father to buy me some, but none of them were as beautiful as the one I had seen. I took the bunny from Galahad's hand, and it was identical to the one in my memory, still warm. "How did you know?" I asked. "I saw that you liked it," he replied. My heart pounded and I couldn't help but ask, "But wasn't it not for sale?" He smiled. "I begged the shopkeeper for a long time. Eventually he couldn't stand my pestering and sold it to me." My ears turned red. "Why?" I asked. He looked down at the bunny with a hint of sadness in his eyes. 10 years ago, I planned to give it to 17-year-old Bethel. 10 years ago today, if I remember correctly, it was the day Philippe confessed his feelings to me. During the afternoon break, he suddenly took a ring made of dogtail grass and asked me to be his girlfriend, his eyes full of passion. I felt confused, but knowing his strong sense of pride, I didn't outright reject him. I simply said, "Let's talk after graduation." He eagerly shouted that he'd take that as my agreement. Everyone thought we were a couple, and since there were other people chasing me at the time, I figured I'd use him to avoid being bothered. I didn't explain it to my classmates. Later, he followed me to the same university, and 2 years later, I was touched by his persistence, and we ended up together. Galahad spoke calmly. "That day, I was practicing here, and I wanted to tell you, Bethel, that I liked you. I wanted to attend the same university as you after the college entrance exams. Would you be my girlfriend?" I don't know when Philippe showed up, but when he saw that I found him, he ran away. Then, I heard you were with him. He came over to show off and told me to stay away from you. I felt my head buzz with anger. At that moment, I just wanted to kill Philippe, that bastard. On the way back, Galahad was driving and I couldn't stop looking at him. I had mixed feelings in my heart. How could Galahad, a masterpiece of mine, be bullied by Philippe because of me? "What are you thinking?" he asked. I had so much to say but didn't know where to begin. After a long pause, I finally said, "But today is your birthday. What if I didn't prepare a gift for you?" He didn't say anything, but his smile grew wider and his ears turned a little red. I thought about it, and there actually was something I could give him, though it was embarrassing. As soon as we entered the house, he handed me a stack of things. "What's this?" I asked. It was my physical examination report, the property deed, and the bank book. I stared at him blankly. He leaned closer, his warm breath brushing my face. "Bethel, I've liked you for 10 years. Will you marry me?" It felt like fireworks were going off in my heart. "Yes," I said, and without hesitation I jumped into his arms and hugged him tightly. I was desperate to give him my gift, like a hungry wolf. The next day I woke up in Galahad's arms. I couldn't go out for a week. Philippe would do anything to get what he wanted. In my past life, I had often stopped him from doing extreme things. In this life, with no one to restrain him, it wasn't surprising that he got involved in a lawsuit for plagiarism. But I knew that wasn't his biggest problem. His real trouble was still ahead. That day, the news came out that a huge amount of customer data from their company had been leaked, and the company was on the brink of destruction. In my past life, the information was leaked from my computer. Philippe was furious, and I couldn't explain what had happened either. As a result, my elderly father had to pay out of his own pocket and put on a smile to help us clean up the mess. One day, the police informed us that they had restored all the operation records from my computer. It was only a matter of time before they found the person who leaked the information. The next day, I received a portable hard drive and went to find Philippe to tell him I suspected Delilah had leaked the information. But at that critical moment, he was in a rush to bring Delilah into the company. I urged him to come to his senses and not invite a wolf into the house. Just then, Delilah ran out and was hit by a car. Later, the investigation confirmed that Delilah had used my computer to leak the data. Philippe merely said, "She's already dead." Why bring it up? People like my father covered for them, choosing to be magnanimous in speech. During the week I rested in Galahad's bed, I had already introduced him to my parents. The old couple was so happy to see Galahad through the video call that they couldn't stop smiling. A few days later, I heard that Delilah had died. An employee from Philippe's company posted online claiming that Delilah was so obsessed with him that she committed suicide when she couldn't have him. I received a call from Philippe using an unknown number. I had just finished exercising with Galahad. The first thing he said told me he, too, had been reborn. "I want to tell you what happened later," he said. I understood immediately. "No need," I replied. I didn't want anything to do with him, either in this life or the previous one. But he knew me too well. "Don't you want to know what happened to Galahad?" he asked. I turned to look at Galahad, who was lying on his side, facing me with his chin propped up by one hand, a slight smile on his lips, and his eyes full of love. I gently brushed my fingers against his eyelashes. He took my hand, kissed it, and pressed his face to my palm. "Okay," I said to the person on the phone. My parents had always been open-minded. I believed that after losing me, they could support each other and live a good life. But I still wanted to know what would happen to Galahad. When Galahad found out I was going to meet Philippe, he stayed silent, making me almost stay in bed for another week. I hadn't seen him for a while, and Philippe seemed to have aged more than 10 years. He no longer had the high spirits he once had, only a look of weariness. We met in the small pavilion in the park downstairs of his house where hardly anyone was around. I sat down opposite him. He gazed at a couple walking their dog in the distance, his eyes a bit red. "We used to come here for walks often," he said. "If only I could have come back earlier." "Get to the point," I interrupted impatiently. He paused for a few seconds, then his voice trembled as he spoke. "After you died, I saw Delilah again." Hearing this, I wasn't particularly shocked. I had suspected her suicide long ago in both lives. She died before the police could investigate and uncover the source of the information leak. "If I say that I'm also a victim, will you forgive me?" he asked, looking at me earnestly. I raised my hand to signal him to continue. "I hired a private detective to investigate her. She was a member of a fraud and theft organization. They had connections everywhere, including in our company, and I was their target. The first time she came to our house to steal was just an act to get close to me. The customer information was bought by a rival company at a high price. After completing the task, she wanted to leave, so she sent you a hard drive to make it look like I was being targeted by her. When you came over and said something extreme, she ran out and faked her death, making me think you killed her." 2 tears rolled down his face as he continued. "They knew I would investigate, so her accomplices in the company kept drugging me to make me always feel guilty toward her. That day, my mental state was already very unstable." "Bethel, I'm sorry," he said, sobbing uncontrollably. But my heart didn't stir. I only cared about one thing. "What about Galahad?" He gave a bitter smile. He came to your funeral, beat me up, then went to a temple and became a monk. My nails dug into my palm and my throat tightened. Is he safe? I asked. He paused, then smiled bitterly. Before I died, he was still alive. I nodded and stood up. Believe me, he said. Bethel, I love you, Philippe called, stepping forward awkwardly. You might not believe it, but I loved you all along. When I confessed before, I was sincere. I looked at him coldly. But you still stole something from Galahad. You're just like Delilah. Both of you are thieves. His lips trembled, and his body swayed. I turned around and left. He called me again, not giving up. Bethel, don't you want to know my aunt? I didn't turn around but said, the sooner you die, the better. On the day Galahad and I got married, we received a red envelope with 3 words written on the back, I'm sorry. After the wedding, when we got home, I saw online that Philippe had found Delilah, who had committed suicide, driven over her with a car, and then ran over her again before driving the car off a cliff. Both of them died on the spot. The police received detailed reports from Philippe about the fraud gang and were launching an investigation. I cursed silently. What a horrible situation. I tossed my phone aside and threw myself at Galahad, kissing his nose. Husband, for the rest of our lives, please teach me more.